Do you have a question for the pastor? If so, send it to askthepastor123@gmail.com. Today on Can I Ask a Question? Ramona would like to know, what does God say about divorce?
Divorce is a reality in our culture today.
Sadly true.
The Bible addresses divorce and remarriage. How do you understand God's words on that?
Okay. Divorce is not a reality in our relationship because Kathy said she'd just kill me first. But in our society, divorce is a sad reality. The Bible talks about staying with somebody who would want to stay with you, that you can't divorce them because your salvation would be a part of their life or it would affect them. But I don't think God will punish us for what somebody else does. Jesus, when he was speaking at the Sermon on the Mount, he talked about divorce, and he talked about those who were looking for petty excuses to put away their wives because there was the biblical mandate that you can get divorced. In my opinion, based upon my understanding of Scripture, there is, and I hate to say there's the innocent party, because I think everything involves more than just a innocent, guilty situation. But if Kathy decided to divorce me, everybody would think, wow, she's finally come to her senses. But the question is, would she be free to get married again? That's why she said she would just shoot me. But I think and there is nobody here that has a family that hasn't been touched by divorce. I would be shocked if we had anybody here that the family hasn't been touched by divorce. And I think when we look at it, it's each one's an individual situation. But I believe that knowing the character of God, God will not hold somebody else's actions against us. While we may have repercussions to the second, third, even fourth generation, what my sin is or what your sin is, God's going to hold me accountable for and hold you accountable for, and not somebody else. And when you look at society, the culture, the things that are going on in our world, it certainly is difficult times. Vows and commitments are no longer what they used to be. As a matter of fact, commitment is a real big deal, or a lack of commitment is a really big deal in the culture in which we live. But if someone is divorced by somebody else, obviously there are always circumstances involved, but I think God looks at the whole situation and looks at really what took place, because God does know what took place and he sees what nobody else sees. I grew up in an environment where it almost seemed like divorce was the unpardonable sin. And I don't think that's accurate. Matter of fact, I think a lot of the things that we have disdained on behalf of God are incorrect. But can somebody be divorced and be saved? Absolutely. Can somebody be divorced and remarried and be still saved? Absolutely. I think, and this is one of those slippery slope questions, you know. Jesus spoke to them on the Sermon on the Mount. Let me get back to that. At the Sermon on the Mount, he told them, he said, now some of you guys are divorcing your wives for the wrong reason, because she can't cook right, or she can't do this right, or whatever. I mean, really, in essence, that's what Jesus was speaking at the Sermon on the Mount, is because they were looking for loopholes, because the Levitical law gave loopholes for divorce. And they were looking for loopholes so they could get a divorce, because today she decided to make her hair green instead of red, or goofy stuff, you know. She burnt my supper, so therefore I'm mad at her. Some crazy stuff. And Jesus addressed that, and he said that, that wasn't acceptable. But the Bible does say that divorce is granted in two instances. One because of adultery, and the other because of hardening of the heart. Basically all divorces have to do with hardening of the heart, but those are the two things. And the Scripture says that in those cases, that the one who was divorced is not held to be accountable for the other person's mistake, sin, or whatever word you want to use. So now, if somebody's been married, divorced 75 times, you might begin to realize there's a pattern there, and maybe they were the guilty party and not everybody else. But you know, I think God's a God of mercy. I really do. I'm counting on it. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we take the word and we read into it what we want to read into it. And I think that, it's very easy for me to be anti-drug because I never use drugs. But somebody who's used drugs has a different perspective. It's very, the joke is that all the experts on raising children haven't raised any children. All the experts on marriage seem to be single. And I think sometimes when we walk through stuff, we get a different perspective. The Bible talks about two walking together. Well, that's two walking together, but if one chooses not to walk, what does the other one do? But the reality of it is only God knows our heart, and God is a God of mercy. And I think the nature of God is not to hold what I have done against somebody else, but let me be accountable for my own self. It doesn't mean there won't be repercussions. It doesn't mean that there won't be side effects, because surely in every divorce there's hurt and there's side effects and there's pain between the two, as well as any children that might be there. So there's definitely side effects or residual effects, or to the second, third, and fourth generation even. But in terms of it being the unpardonable sin, definitely not. And if someone is choosing to divorce somebody, especially for no apparent reason, or for not a good reason, or not even a biblical reason, I don't think God holds that against that individual. And but the cool thing is, God works with every one of us in our own individual lives and our own individual relationship. And there are things that God will not allow me to do that He might allow others to do. And by the same token, there's things that God might allow others to do that He won't allow me to do. And I think the cool thing about God is He custom fits everything to where we are. I think in those cases where there is that situation, and the Bible tells us that the innocent party, or the one who was divorced in events of adultery, is free from that bondage of not being able to remarry. And then sets up a whole other set of questions. What kind of adultery are we talking about? Are we talking about physical adultery? Are we talking about mental adultery? And that's that's a God thing, But the reality of it is, God does make a provision not only for divorce, but also for remarriage. And I hope that somewhat answers a muddied question.